So generally, when you have like big stalwarts in the industry coming together, they usually don't have the time to sit down and pen down their thoughts. And then he said, okay, I think I'm leaving. I don't want to stay here. And he called two of his other subordinates, and all three of them left. And in 20 minutes, it caved in and 10 people died. For instance, one of the things about Congo is it produces like 60% of world's cobalt. Okay. And cobalt is integral to every electronic chip that we have. We wanted to create something that was not already existing, and this is a huge problem. It's more than coal, oil, steel, and iron industries combined.
Wow.
It's so massive. Again, journalists are not expected to behave in a certain way. The kind of communication gap, I wouldn't say it's a gap, but it's just the way you communicate is very different.
This is Vishnu Rajamanickam. He's my nephew, and we haven't seen in ages, right, Vishnu? I'd like to introduce him to you. We are just ordinary people. He's also very ordinary, but he's on the way to an extraordinary career and doing extraordinary things. Welcome to Ordinary People and Extraordinary Stories, Vishnu. I'm very glad that you're here. You're my first guest.
Nice to be here. Nice to be the first one, probably like a pilot program for this entire series.
Really, really nice feeling after so many years catching up with you. And if not for your book, I wouldn't have invited you for a meeting, I think. So let's start from there. It says you... Actually, I got to know about it by your Facebook post. And when you said it's your book, but I couldn't see your name as the author or writer or editor, whatever it is. It was some two other names. So what is that story? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So this is kind of so there are different ways through which you can write a book, right? So one of the very normal ways that all of us, including me, knew about is where you're writing something, and then once it's done, you probably publish it yourself, like on Amazon, let's say, or you go to a publishing house and they help with, snipping up the bits and making sure the draft is ready to, go out for an audience. But there, with non-fiction, especially with books that kind of cut parallel with academia, these are books that not a single person writes, because there's a lot of different needs that come into making a book of that stature. So for one, with this book, I just explained what happened with our book. So generally, when you have like big stalwarts in the industry coming together, they usually don't have the time to sit down and pen down their thoughts. So they have everything like in a mixer inside their head, and you need to draw out those insights. And you need to be a journalist or someone inside the industry who's been soaked inside the industry and who knows, exactly how to write and what would be perceived in what way, right? So this is one really important thing, and that's where I come in. So I've been a journalist for 5-6 years now in this industry. So I know kind of all the ins and outs of how audience perceive certain kinds of drafts, right? So, and I'm also friends with them. So the two people, right? So one is Radu. So he is more like a marketer. So he runs a really famous, I think one of the best podcasts in supply chain. And he regularly interviews people from, some of the biggest companies in the world. And all those people incidentally also made it into this book. So he brought in the connections. So he knew these people personally. So they were like, let's say head of, most of them head of multi-billion-dollar businesses around the world, who touch like millions of lives and families around the world. So, so these people are his own friends. So he knows them personally. And then when there's this idea of creating a book, not just a podcast, because people understand, or rather he understood that people were kind of, like really engrossed with stories from the industry, which is not said out in regular medium, regular, let's say, Business Insider. We do talk of stories, but not to the extent where you explain everything that's happening in their lives, and really interesting anecdotes that can't be actually jotted down on paper. So he saw that this was an opportunity to create a book rather than like a magazine backstory, but to create an entire to understand the evolution of a leader from where he started as probably like an engineer, like most of us, to climb up the ladder to reach the ranks that they've reached. So what are the kind of difficulties they face? What are the kind of challenges they see on a daily basis? What is the impact of the pandemic, for instance? So there's so many different things that they've seen which could be useful for any even tier 3, tier 4 manager who looks and thinks about being at that stage maybe 20 years down the lane. So it's an idea which you cannot read in an academic textbook. It's an idea which you can't read on a magazine. So you need a different kind of a medium, which is where a book comes in, where you can create like a series of stories and string them together into a book. So this is kind of, let's say, the volume 1 of what could be any number of books in the future. Okay. So this is where we started. So again, Radu was the guy who brought in the people. And Knut Alike, so he is a partner of McKinsey. And McKinsey is the world's largest management consulting firm, and they're everywhere. They're practically everywhere. And he's the head of European supply chain for McKinsey. So that's a very big position. And because he was in that level, he could get a lot of, so this is again an interesting backstory, that a lot of these CEOs and chief ex of supply chains across the world, they have a background in management. A lot of them were management trainees at McKinsey. They've worked in McKinsey, Bain and company. So for like 20, 30 years before they actually move and come out of this management world into the real industry world, like coming into, let's say, FMCG companies. Okay. So they directly assume the position of a CEO or some kind of a C executive. And so these guys, since they've been friends from the times they were working at McKinsey, could directly unlock this connection and get to talk to them and ask, like, send an SMS asking, hey, would you be interested in talking to us for this book that we're putting together? Okay. And that's how we got a few more people from his end. And so they created the connection. They know these people, so they give me kind of a backdrop about what they are, comfortable talking about, and also give me some pointers on, hey, this is something that happened in their life. So, for instance, there's this guy. I forgot actually who it was, but the story was very interesting. So apparently this guy was a manager in a oil rig, like oil company, and he was asked to go and check an oil rig or some kind of a heavy machinery stuff, which was, I think, in Congo. I think it's Congo, but I don't remember, but a country in Africa which is completely war torn, right? So he had apparently been there, and he was asked to go down the mine, which is like 1 mile down, and crisscrossing through all these valleys, which is like riddled with a lot of explosives. And apparently he went there and he saw that the thing where they were actually constructing, it was not stable. Like the facade was not stable. He felt that it could any day cave in. And he said he had an epiphany that he was like, shit, I shouldn't be here. And then he said, okay, I think I'm leaving. I don't want to stay here. And he called 2 of his other subordinates, and all 3 of them left. And in 20 minutes, it caved in and 10 people died. Oh my God. So he said that things can get really wrong in supply chain, which people like us would never know. For instance, one of the things about Congo is it produces like 60% of world's cobalt. Okay. And cobalt is integral to every electronic chip that we have and use. So batteries, everything uses cobalt. So your MacBook, your iPhones, your Android, nothing works without cobalt. So without Congo, none of this works. And Congo has a huge problem with child labor and forced labor and terrorism, Boko Haram and stuff. So they have a lot of issues there. And large corporations like Apple or Foxconn, they obviously exploit them. But this is, it shows you a very fascinating side of the picture where things that you never think about, but you actively use, is creating such a big ripple effect across the world, right? So these are the kind of stories we are looking for, and these are the kind of stories we were, putting together in the book. And so essentially, coming back to your question on where my name is, I'd be called the editor. Why? Because I'm the one bringing in the written content, but the ideas come from 26 different executives. The connection was made by these two people. And since they are the ones who are like, at the peak of their career, and obviously I'm still growing and I'm nowhere near them. So for me, it is better and also understandable on their end to just pay me for what I did. So I can get a little bit of royalty and they pay me, but I'm not going to be the writer, because it's like, you decide that amongst yourself, and people in the industry know that, because for instance, when they read I have a signature style of writing. I think everyone has it, right? So once you start writing enough and people have been reading your stuff for like ages, they know instantly when they read something that who it comes from. And these people also, kind of appreciate me every step of the way, and they're tagging me, telling me that, telling that in public, saying without you this wouldn't be possible and stuff. So it's kind of understood in the industry that this is the way things move when you're trying to write a book like this. So essentially the bottom line is that my name wouldn't be on the cover, but my name, and I would have an editor note. I'll have about the editor, the section about me and stuff inside the book.
So once we buy the book and open it,
you can see it
and see it, get inside, and we'll understand what is your part. Okay, thanks for such an elaborate answer. And that cobalt industry, that's a news for me. That's an interesting point. Thanks for that. Vishnu, I want to know how you met Ron and Knut. How did you get connected with them, and why did they who pitched this idea for this book, and why it is Vishnu and not anybody else?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So I had a stint, or rather not a short stint, medium sized, I would say. I was working for this company called Frightways for about 3.5 years. And I was one of their first journalists. I think I was number 2 or number 3, probably in the same, 3 people joined in the same week. So I don't know who was before, but yeah, I was number 2 or number 3. And this was a company that we're just setting up in, I think, like early 2017. I joined in October 2017. And so the idea of the company was to create a medium within transportation and logistics in such a way that the information is more palatable for the normal audience and also to the industry stakeholders, right? So we wanted to create something that was not already existing, and this is a huge problem. Interestingly, supply chain kind of governs everything that we do, and just the transportation sector in the US is, in terms of volume, or rather in terms of value, it's more than coal, oil, steel, and iron industries combined.
Wow.
It's so massive. Just the trucking industry is $800 billion strong every year in the US. So it's a massive industry that does not have a proper medium or source of information. We do have like a couple of different magazines or trade news outlets out there, but they're not that big. So they don't have a big subscription base. So our idea right off the bat was to create something valuable, which hasn't been seen in the industry, and trying to create it in a very interesting way. So most of these trade journalists are people with 30-40 years of experience reporting. So they have this style of writing, right? So we call them the boomer generation. So they have a very distinct style of writing, which is not palatable to an average audience who's trying to understand the industry. But then again, from my end, I'm much more younger, and I have a different style of writing which should appeal to the younger people also. And the younger people are the ones who consume more of digital media. The older people are more interested and more not tech savvy, so they are more into the reading on a book or a magazine kind of a person, right? So this way we started. We had like really good people coming in at the start. So I think at the start we had like 4 or 5 journalists put together. We were all kind of new to the industry, but we were like willing to learn, putting in like 15 hours a day, insane working schedule. So we worked there probably 2 years. We started building up, and when I left, it was the largest, and I think even now the largest in the world for logistics and supply chain. So we started at like, let's say, 5,000 views a month for our stories. When I left, it was around 3 million a month.
Okay.
So yeah, we grew like surprisingly fast. Even for us, we didn't expect this kind of reception from our audience, but it started growing because we did create a lot of good content, and we also had data. So we were also powered by data. We had a lot of data analysts on our team. So we worked more like a startup than like a trade news outlet. So we called ourselves a startup rather than any other normal news outlet that keeps dishing out the same stuff in different styles of writing, right? So we had data, we had young people, we had a lot of investors coming on board who were like really interested in this idea and like seizing the moment of changing journalism. So what we set out to do was what Michael Bloomberg set out to do in the 90s or 80s. I'm not really sure when Bloomberg started, but Bloomberg is like the yardstick for any kind of energy related news and information. They literally control that medium. So we set out in a way that we wanted to replicate Bloomberg, or rather Freightways. I'm no longer associated with them, but when we started out with the idea of creating another Bloomberg for supply chain, and I guess we ended up doing that to an extent. Of course, we're still young. They are still young, but I think it's a good way. That's where I started. So answering your question, so I just came out of the company, and Alcott Global, or rather the company that Radu runs, his company is called Alcott Global. So he knew me already because I worked with him on different stories while I was at Freightways. So at Freightways, I think I did like 1,000 stories in like 3.5 years. So that's quite a lot of stories. Yeah. And probably around
on an average.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And take away weekends, so it was like a loaded plate throughout the week, for 3 years straight. And I had a lot of opportunities to meet all these nice people, and Radu was one such person. And he knew me like from the days of Freightways. He was living in Singapore back then. He's from Romania. And we had a really nice time working this through. And so he, after I came out of Freightways, he's asking me like, what's your plan and what do you want to do? And I said, okay, I'm like trying to do some freelancing because I don't want to do it like anything full time. I wanted to just work with many different clients or prospective clients back then. And they're all asked me if I could work with them, because at Freightways I didn't have the bandwidth to work with them separately because I already had enough on my plate. So I figured that it'll be better for me to just be a freelancer, because I really wanted to travel and go around and like live my life and probably take time off if I wanted. So this was kind of a good opportunity to try experimenting with what I can do, especially since I had like information about the industry which not a lot of people. So I had this like moat around my skill set. Not many people did what I did. So it eventually helped me. So I asked him, and he said, we have so many things going on in our company. If you want to do something with content, let me know. And then I said, hey, this is what I want to do. This is where I think I might add value. And then after like a few months, I was already working with different companies. He came back to me, he said, Vishnu, why don't you try working with us on this book? I said, but I've never done a book. I've like literally never written a book, and a book of this scale that you're talking about seems to be quite arduous, right? And then he said, no, I really respect you. I've seen your journalism grow over the years, and I really like the style that you write. And I think this is the way we want our books to be. And one of the things about trade journalism, again, like I said, is people are much older than me in this industry, and I really respect pretty much all of them. I think I have so much to learn from all of them, and it's a great situation to be in. I'm much younger than them, so there's only upwards. I can go only upwards. I have nothing to lose, and I can always learn. Probably just like like I talk to them, I learn so much. So it's always good for me to be working with such people. But one thing I notice is that they have again a specific way of writing, which probably is not something that would work for a book that is not completely academic. Like I said, it's something that an average person needs to consume. So we don't want to just stick to the supply chain audience, but rather the idea was to take it out and try creating this managerial insights which could be used by any kind of manager across the world. So you could be a manager in Infosys, for instance. Like, you should still be able to use some nuggets from the story, anecdotes from the stories to to your own life. So that was the idea, and I think that was the reason they chose me. I think there were more talented people also. I'm not going to say I'm the best fit there, but then somehow it did end up on my shoulders. And I think eventually we are very happy with the product that came out, and I think everyone's happy. Even the reviews that we've gotten till now has been like really good. So yeah, pretty happy.
I'm very happy to hear that, Vishnu. You let's say you begin with a bang. My professor used to say, whatever you do, begin with a bang. Your opening should be really grandeur. So I think that's what you have achieved. But a lot of background work has gone in all these years. You have killed yourself, I think, with so many interviews and hours of work. And I can understand how much toll it takes on your life. Thanks for sharing all those things. I couldn't stop thinking about it. You are an NIT product, right? In India, it's a kind of a perception that when you go to meet professionals, that too top level executives, they wear coat and suit, and they are in fully dressed up. You are on a stubble. Do their eyebrows shrink, or is there any difference? Because in India,
No, I don't think so. Because most of the people I meet are from Europe or from the US. Or from the UK. I mean, if you consider them to be part of Europe. But this has never been a problem, like really. Why? Because many of them sport tattoos, for instance. Many of them have piercings. And logistics is a field where people are very rugged, like you're not in management consulting, for instance. Like if you see Knut, for instance, he's always, you see him, you feel, I mean, he's also a professor in a German university, so he acts his part. Obviously I can't be like this. Maybe, I don't know, like this in Germany might be not fair on universities. I think like universities professors they have their dignity, I would say. But I would rather never, I think I would never be a professor, so I never thought about it. But these management consulting people, they behave that way because it's kind of the decorum that's expected out of a person in management, right? But in logistics, they don't actually see that. A lot of our people are very open. They're very there's a lot of style in the industry, I believe. Like even in India, if you think of all the trucks in India, think of the colors that they exhibit, right? True. Like the facade is so colorful. If you go to Pakistan, Afghanistan, you see their trucks, they're more colorful. I've actually done a story, I think, with Punjabi truckers, not just in India, in California. Because in California, I think 40% of all truckers, 40% of all truckers are Sikhs. So it's insane. Like a single, like an ethnic portion, not even all of entirety of India, just a little demographic, just the Sikh population have literally like taken over West US trucking. So they put a lot of colors. They have the Khalsa insignia everywhere. So I had a friend who used to take photos of trucks, and he was a truck photographer, like a photojournalist. And he used to send me these photos asking, "Hey, Vishnu, what is the meaning of this?" And then it's like, "Is this a Hindu truck driver? Is this a Sikh guy?" It's like, "Do you see lemons?" Then no, probably Sikh. So it's like, it's funny, but people try exhibiting their differences, or probably try belonging to different groups. So you see that very strongly amongst especially the logistics workforce. I'm not talking of me, but
Okay.
of the workforce, right? The blue collar. But then even for people like us, we don't care. And even when I was at Frightways, for instance, again, journalists are not expected to behave in a certain way,
Okay.
because again, they consider us to be really free, like we're floating everywhere, we're talking to everyone.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, at least I feel that when you come from the lower strata, let's say you're trying to talk to the head of a company of, let's say, a $10 billion company,
Okay.
the way a normal person approaches that person versus me approaching that person would be a little bit different. Me, in the sense, I'm not talking of me like a
No, a
journalist.
journalist.
If
Yeah.
journalists want to create a good conversation, want to extract some nice information, right? So at the end of the day, that's the idea of connecting.
Yeah.
And when you can do that really properly, you get really interesting stories out of that person. But then imagine you're a person as an employee talking to the same person, but
Yeah.
from the a few levels down.
Yeah.
The way you approach your leader or boss would be very different, right?
Yeah.
So the kind of communication gap, I wouldn't say it's a gap, but it's just the way you communicate is very different.
Entirely
So they
different.
don't expect me to behave like a person from their own company who's
I
at
get it.
a level there.
Yeah.
So that way I am always having this leeway to like have my own style, work on my own pace. And also because I'm a freelancer, yeah, everything counts in my favor. They don't expect me to behave in a certain way. And in fact, if I am wearing like suit and stuff,
Yeah.
then it'll look a bit weird. Like people don't expect me ever
I
to be
understand.
that way.
I understand. I understand. Thanks for clearly explaining it. I didn't expect this kind of answer. I didn't have this kind of perspective. Thanks. It's really educating. And let's move on to the next question. I know you work for Business Insider and also for Reuters. How did that happen? Is it after Fright Waves or before Fright Waves?
It was after Frightways. So when I was at Frightways, I was a full-time employee. So when you're full-time for a news outlet, you are, I think it's journalistic integrity for you to not work with any other company.
Okay.
Or I don't know, I think, yeah, it doesn't usually happen. But then if you're a contributing journalist, so back then I was a desk journalist. So all my life, it was about, at least in my career in that portion, was about me trying to connect with companies, trying to write commentaries, trying to do interviews and stuff. And that was purely only for Frightwaves. But then when I came out, I had my own individual capacity to do whatever kind of stories I wanted. For instance, now I do a lot of different varieties of things. So it's not just the journalism thing I do.
Okay.
I have my own company for one. I have my separate clients that I work outside of my own company. I have Business Insider, I have Reuters. But then Reuters, I don't report. So for Business Insider, I report like a journalist. But again, I'm not a desk reporter. I'm a contributing logistics journalist. Let's put it that way. And for Reuters, I work on long form content. So Reuters has this segment called Reuters Events, which is where they have segments. Like they have a segment called supply chain. So they do only supply chain stories that are like long form, like 5 pages to 10 pages long, with
Okay.
interviews of like 6, 7 people. So for the last Reuters thing, I work with head of supply chain, Pepsi, Europe, Lego, like the
Yeah.
game
Blocks.
stuff.
Yeah.
So all these people. So we do interviews like 5, 6 people for one white paper,
Okay.
and then we do that. And I'm like the editor for that. And again, I'm called the editor, but I'm the writer. So
Okay.
that's like
Yeah.
yeah, that's like the general thing. But yeah, so I work there, but that's more of a long term thing, like one project goes on for 2, 3 months.
Okay.
Business Insider is short stuff, 600 words to 1,000 word stuff. So that's like 1 week for an article, let's say. But then again, it's very flexible. I probably do like 2-3 stories a month because I have other things. I also run a newsletter for the industry, which is like I use a lot of data to write these newsletters. So that's like another completely different domain within journalism, right? So yeah, so I do all these different things. And Business Insider and Reuters, again, they just came to me. Like, again, I never applied for any of this except Frightways, which is the only thing I applied. Everything else just comes to me because they know me from the industry. They know me as a person who's been in the media spotlight for quite a while. So they come to me and they work with me. You know, it's I'm not saying this as a sign of pride. It's just that I think it works the same way for most journalists who are at this level, you know. So we probably have, let's say, 20-30 such journalists doing the same thing that I do in the world. So for this market, of course. So my specialty lies in the North American market. So I do trucking and maritime. So in that segment, not many people function. There are many people who know a lot of stuff, but they don't write. You know, so people who write and also understand the industry, there are not a lot of people. So when they write, people consume that. So they get to me through many different mediums, you know, like people share my stuff. So it just keeps going everywhere that I don't know where it's going. And then they come back to me and ask me if I'm free. And then if I'm free, I say, yeah, let's start working together. So that's usually how it happens. And with Business Insider, it was through a person I didn't even know who knew me through my reporting and knew me as a nice person. And she introduced me to the editor who came to me directly and asked me if you're free, we can work together. Yeah.
You don't speak for yourself, but your work speaks.
Yeah, that's kind of, that's at least in the media, I think it's super evident, right? Like probably if you're in a company, it's not that evident. I think you need to show it, like really speak that, you know, speak out in a boardroom meeting, for instance, that I've done it. But for me, it's not needed. So yeah, I'm lucky that way.
Vishnu, shall we take a short break and then get back again?
Yeah, sure. No problem. I'll be here.